Something that comes up a lot in the sword-loving community is kind of a dearth of anything fantasy sword related. Now we have a couple of these looking swords, which are obviously fake. What if there was somebody that made a real one? Now this is the extra large Elvish Saber by Lonely Wolf Forge. Give you kind of a closer look up at the details. Zooming in there on the pommel. You can see it is damascened, and you got Damascus or a folded steel pattern. See if you can see that okay. Boop. Absolutely beautiful. Nice corded leather grip. Another damascened hand guard. The really beautiful finish on there. Everything's super tight. Pommel and handguard are both that. And you have a really nice spring steel blade. Looking down, the profile taper on this guy. Got a nice thick base. Very strong, powerful blocks. All the way out to a very thin, acute tip right there. For those super precise thrusts. Now this sword takes a lot of its inspiration from the Lord of the Rings universe. This is the extra large Elvish Saber. Now, immediately upon picking this up, you'll see we have a pretty intense curve coming off the end, which historically was super rare on swords of this type. So, why do you think that curve would be there? So there's a couple of stylistic reasons, perhaps. This looks really cool, kind of exotic, yet functional. And the elves, I think, is probably, that describes them pretty well. Now, historically, a lot of swords, so I can pick one up here really quick, that were two-handed, have long, straight blades with an acute thrusting point towards the tip. Now, this sword, of a similar length, being curved, is actually going to weigh quite a bit more, even with similar amounts of distal taper. You can see down there. So, why would anyone choose to go with a curved thing? Now, the elves, we already know, are extremely strong and they live forever, so they have a lot more training, so perhaps their Overton window for the size and weight of swords is going to be a bit different than, say, a human who's only been training, max 50 years during the time. But with that curve, you can do all kinds of sneaky things. You can see, with my point being on line, my hands can be outside. That'd be one of the biggest reasons, and I'll show you why. This right here is a shield. A shield is for blocking things, obviously. Now, a lot of the opponents that the elves were facing, apart from a few different times, it's almost certainly going to be orcs. So this is going to be a much higher quality shield than most of them would be aware of. And the shield is probably sort of approximately the same size. So just imagine this is more Lord of the Ringsy looking. Now, with a straight blade, we pull that out again here really quick. With a straight blade, your opponent presenting that shield forward, I don't have a whole ton of openings. I can try and sneak under, I can try and chop the legs. With a curved weapon, that becomes entirely different. So if their head is kind of this area up here, I might be able to sneak a point in, I might be able to sneak a point in, I might be able to cut towards the legs. But it's going to be very hard to get around that shield, especially if it's been used in an active defense. So sneaking at the point, chop to the legs. Those are going to be your biggest things with a shield. Now the curved saber, especially a two-handed one, you have the advantage of range with a two-handed weapon, because almost certainly a shield is going to be used with a one-handed weapon. So I can stay further away from my opponent. And now that we have that curve, I can actually sneak up underneath the shield or come over the top to hit my opponent. I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so here I am. You are presenting your shield towards me, your opponent. Here's my sword. I can stay kind of far away. I can cut into your shield. I can flip that point over and sneak it in while still being behind your shield. So I can attack from all kinds of weird angles because it does have that curve as opposed to a more straight blade. So you can see over the top right through there, over the top right through here, right into the arm, up into the head, whatever it would take. Now, some specs on this sword. I went ahead and weighed it. This sword is about 3.14 pounds, a little bit on the heavier side for a longsword. Because it's curved, we're obviously not going to have the range of a more traditional longsword. Up in here for the same sort of kind of weight, you do gain some advantages in some other places. So being an elf, you'd probably want to be, like I said, more exotic, more exciting. It does look really good. But the biggest question with a sword like this is being so fantasy, not even based on anything historical, is can you use it? The answer, absolutely. So a sword like this can definitely be used. It was made pretty well. Everything's sturdy. There's nothing coming loose in the handle. You have a little bit less range because of that curve. Other than that, this thing can be used just like a normal longsword. You can really do those massive cuts, go through your opponent, and you can see because of the curve, it tracks really well, making this a really powerful cutter. I can cut up, up, down, down, side, side. Remember that old lightsaber game from like the 2000s? Because this guy does have a curve too, we can do those fun things around the shield. But doing things like shield house, when you're cutting down your opponent's blade, it's going to be a lot more impactful because you're just going to be hitting with that point, cutting with your false edge. Just like that. You're going to use a little bit of the cutting power here. We're just sticking that really wicked point up into your opponent. That's going to be more than enough. And as you can see here, cut the Myers square, super easy. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it tracks beautifully. So you can really feel if your edge alignment's going to be off. So you can loosen up your dominant hand to help get that additional accuracy. Something that we do kind of miss with long swords is having that curve to track through. So that's why a lot of people think it's super hard to cut with long swords, but then they can pick up things like a katana or a saber or even a really curved messer and cut like it's nothing. This kind of works like a wind sail as it's cutting down and the air is deflecting off the edge. This kind of works like a wind sail or the thing on the back of a boat to help direct the blade just a little bit. You get a little bit of cheat when you're cutting with this guy, I'd say. And it's a really, really good cutter. You saw in the beginning of me looking at tatami, cutting through this guy, and pretty much it works just like a normal longsword. It doesn't have a false edge on it, which I think is totally fine for this type of a blade. The elves, I imagine, are mostly going to be dealing with lesser or unarmored opponents, being the orcs, the men, the bandits, or even, the first battles in the history of Arda, the kinslings and stuff like that. They're fighting people with basically no armor. So a sword like this, just being kind of a big cleaving weapon with a little bit of armor capability, it's going to be pretty much everything you'd need in a fantasy universe. Especially since most of your opponents are fighting with weapons of about this size, which is just arming sword length. You having just a little bit extra reach with a two-handed weapon is going to be awesome. Not to mention it's an amazing showpiece. So when you draw this on your opponent and they're picking up one of these, lousy but still cool arming swords, having that extra range, that extra cutting power on this one, it's about the same size as my arming sword. Having that extra cutting power with two hands is going to give you a massive advantage, especially when they start throwing out those weird things with the shield. So if your opponent has the shield, it's almost always going to be presented outwards. And if it's presented outwards in the block, they're cutting the range super short. They can't really pivot and open themselves up because that's going to cross their line. You having a two-handed weapon, you're not so concerned about this defense. You can outreach your opponent fairly easily and then go around their shield. You can kind of see that opening right there opens up. Right there would be perfect for sneaking that point in. Go into block, take that sword and flip it in underneath, and you can get your opponent. So in conclusion, can fantasy swords exist in real life? Absolutely. Does this fit exactly what I think somebody in the Lord of the Rings, one of the elves, would be carrying? 100%. Not only is it a light, fast, quick, agile blade, but it's also a really powerful cutter. And Lonely War Forged does a really good job of making sure it's super steady. So I can smack that. You can see that stiffness in the blade. There's no rattle, there's nothing crazy. So I'd consider him probably one of the only fantasy sword manufacturers that are even close to worth their salt. And another angle on that shield, you can see here, this is as far as I would be able to go if it was just a longsword, being able to attack. That's kind of the extent of my opening. With a sword like this that's curved, you can kind of see that I can go behind. So you can see kind of that dramatic difference of target openings with the same angle. Whoop. On a secondary note, now that we've hit 500 subscribers, we're starting to expand the scope of the channel. So we're starting to work a lot more with more fantasy swords. We're going to be working with some more of the more of the historical swords as well. What would you guys like to see out of more videos? Go ahead and comment below, and if you have any tips for me, we're trying to grow as a community. And the only money that I make from YouTube is going to go to find swords that people haven't reviewed yet and putting them up for other people to see so you know what you're getting. Go ahead and comment below what you'd like to see, and we'll see you next time. Please like and subscribe.